Welcome all to this annual lecture on the rights of Indigenous peoples. This event is a collaboration between LawTransform, CMI-UiB Center on Law and Social Transformation, the NFR-funded research project Pluriland, Theorizing Conflict and Contestation in Plural Land Rights Regimes, Bergen Global, Bergen Sami Association, SET, Center for Climate and Energy Transformation, and GRIP, Global Research Program on Inequality. Today, we are lucky to have with us Ranjan and Datta, and we're very much looking forward to this lecture titled Indigenous Perspectives on Climate Change, Challenges and Solutions, a Decolonial Learning Journey. The lecture lasts for 30 minutes and will be followed by a panel discussion with distinguished guests. I'll introduce the panelists after the lecture. My name is Lara Cõrtes. I'm the coordinator for LawTransform. I will have the honor to moderate this event. Ranjan Datta with us is Canada Research Chair 2 in Community Disaster Research at Indigenous Studies, Department of Humanities, Montreal University in Canada. Ranjan's research interests include advocating for Indigenous environmental sustainabilities, responsibilities for decolonial research, Indigenous water and energy justice, critical anti-racist climate change resilience, and cross-cultural community research. He has a total of 58 peer-reviewed publications, including 3 books, 5 edited books, 2 journal special issues on decolonial research, traditional story sharing, Indigenous community-based participatory action research, Indigenous land, water, and sustainability issues. Ranjan Datta, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First, I would like to acknowledge the opportunity, sharing opportunity that I got. And I'm very grateful to all the research partners, particularly CMI and University of Bergen. So this is the great opportunity for me. Today, I'm going to talk about my learning experience that I had opportunity to learn couple of Indigenous communities from Canada and also in South Asia. Going to talk about my learning on climate change challenges and how to solve those problems from the community-based and community-engaged perspective. Before I'm going to talk about it, so I would like to acknowledge that all Indigenous communities around the world, particularly the land I came from is called TD7 territory in Calgary, Calgary city, and also other Indigenous community who have given the opportunity to live and learn. And as you can see, I'm color immigrant, and I acknowledge all the minorities around the world as well. In my talk, you can see I will talk the colonial history on environment and climate change, and also I recognize the colonial history has created many challenges to the Indigenous community around the world. And all stories, traditional stories, land-based stories, I consider as a scientific story because, as you can see, Indigenous land-based sustainability has been sustainable for thousands of years. So they don't need validation from the Western science that they are science. They already proven science. That's why I consider all traditional knowledge as a scientific knowledge. And I also consider Indigenous elder knowledge keepers and local people are important source of knowledge because they know what is the best for the community. So I consider them as a scientist for the community, and I am as a researcher, as a learner. And also I would like you to acknowledge the land you came from, the community you came from, acknowledge them that they are the knowledge holder who is giving us opportunity as a researcher, educator to learn from the community. So I would like to situate myself. I'm minority. I born in Bangladesh in a religious minority community, and I had a strong relationship with the community. I had opportunity to learn meaning of land, meaning of climate change from the various ethnic minority communities and also religious minority communities. So I also got the land-based education from the community, from my community and other community as well. So that's why I consider myself as a land-based minority scholar who have a deep connection with the land and land-based spirituality. And I consider my identity as a hybrid in a sense that I see myself, I have deeply connected with the land-based learning with my religious minority and other ethnic minority communities. So hybridity, I use concept of Homi Bhabha, post-colonial theorist, and also subalternity I use when I'm explaining my identity as understanding how land-based people has been pushed back or displaced several times because of the colonial reason or colonial perspective. And I had opportunity to work various indigenous communities in South Asia, particularly in Bangladesh. Currently I'm working with Cree, Dene, and Kainai First Nation communities in Canada, TD6 and TD7 territory. I'm also working with racialized immigrant, Black, and refugee communities. And currently I have extended my work opportunity to work with indigenous people in Ghana. So today, basically, I'm going to talk about, as I said, what I have learned from the community, what kind of knowledge the community gave me to learn. So exploring my responsibility to think who I am and who I need to be. So mostly on talking about my learning experience. So whatever I'm going to talk is my own learning experience instead of representative direct voice from the community. So for my research, I have learned from various theoretical framework because if we don't understand our theoretical understanding or our worldviews, it's difficult to do climate change research with indigenous community or minority communities in all over the world. That's why I have worked last 15 years to understanding my relational perspective with the community. For instance, I learned from the community, various indigenous communities in North America, even in South Asia. When we are doing research with the local people, indigenous people, or land-based people, first we need to understand who we are and what we are doing. So that's why we need to think about relationality. That means when we are working with the community, we shouldn't consider community as a participant. The community should be our relative. That means there shouldn't be we versus they. Because when we are talking about they, that means we have power to generalize their knowledge. But when we are thinking that we are all building solidarity, understanding you are my relative, that makes me responsible. That makes responsible to my action, my research, and my thinking. And I also use decolonial theoretical framework last 10 to 12 years. Decolonial theoretical framework means is a lifelong journey of unlearning, and relearning. Unlearning means how our colonial education that is not connected with the community's everyday practice. Unlearning means how our education or research became tools of colonization. That's why Maori indigenous scholar Dr. Linda Smith, she said, research became mosquito, suck your blood, then leave. In my research, our community said the research became foreign bird. Once they come, they never show up. So that's why research, it's not that indigenous people or land-based people, they haven't used the research in their life. They have been using research or concept of development for thousands of years, but meaning was very different. That's why we need to unlearn. At the same time, we have a responsibility to relearn from the community perspective, relearn what community wants. I have been also working with anti-racist perspective to understanding as a color settler in Canada, even as a minority scholar in back home Bangladesh, how my research is creating a big, or my research stemming became challenging for the many communities. I also use indigenous theoretical framework. That means when we understand our responsibility, when we are talking about community needs, and when my research is changing myself, who I need to be, first And also when we are working with the community, thinking this community also my community. This community challenges also my challenges. It's make me responsible, and it is connected to the land and land-based people. It's called Indigenous research methodology. That's why I have been using Indigenous research methodology in my research as well. I also use land-based theoretical framework. That means the land-based knowledge, traditional land-based knowledge has been sustainable for a long, long time. That's why I center land-based theoretical framework in my research purposefully. Methodology, I use community engaged research, community lead research, because community is giving me lots of opportunity to learn. And another methodology, I use land-based methodology, decolonization, anti-racist from responsibility perspective. And method, I use traditional storytelling from the elder and knowledge keeper as a significant source of knowledge. I also use music, art, dance. And when I moved to Canada, I learned the new research methodology is blanket exercise. Basically, blanket exercise means indigenous people, they are telling their colonial story and pre-colonial story and ongoing colonial story through blanket to the non-indigenous scholar or immigrant communities. So I learned those perspectives from the Canada. And land-based working means working with the elder knowledge keeper. Elder is explaining the importance of plant, land, river, moon, and everything. And I consider my research that so-called in Western research, they call participant. I call them as relative. I call them as a co-researcher. That's why many of my work published with the indigenous elder, knowledge keeper, or educators. And my research is not only research for academic needs. I try to center my research to solving community problem as an action, as a part of everyday movement to land and water protection movement or climate change movement. I also use my reflective learning. When I'm doing research, I try to learn how my research helped me to transform who I am. If not helping me to transform, I'm not doing enough. So I try to reflect, always reflect my research. Opportunity that I got today to share, I also think it's a reflective learning, because when we are listening to me, you become my relative. Once you become my relative, you are become responsible to your own learning and action. So, and also I use deep listening to listening from the elders and knowledge keepers. So I try to follow the indigenous protocol as much as possible. For example, respecting and honoring indigenous knowledge and practice. As you know, I got training from land-based education. I also got training from the colonial institution, right? So we are living in the colonial world, but understanding decolonial process is also helping to unlearn and relearn. And also maintaining traditional protocol with the community that I'm working, learning as from the indigenous researcher, educator, and also writing and analyzing my research finding with indigenous researcher, and collecting stories from indigenous relatives that the indigenous elder knowledge keeper, when I had opportunity to learn, they always refer me as their relative. And I also consider as my guardian, as their as a scientist, as I said previously. I try to center indigenous voice in my research, in my policy report, in my publication as much as I can. I also co-write with elder and knowledge keepers. So I would like to give you a couple of examples that what from my current research, what I am learning, what is the meaning of climate change from the indigenous perspective. For example, my current research that we have done with indigenous Kainai First Nation community from TD7 territory. And this research is led by one of my co-researcher, who is my research assistant, Tina Starlight, she is the one who actually did all those cultural camp, TP in the whole day. And I was a learner over there. So I'm going to share some of the perspective with my co-researcher permission that I can share this learning perspective. So why do we need to decolonize the meanings of research from indigenous perspective, or what does the meaning of climate change from the community. So climate change for the Kainai First Nation, the community that I have learned, they say it's because of we are disconnected from the land. We have our education, our training, everything is kind of stealing children from the community-based knowledge. That is the one of the significant reason. And their animal is getting sick. That's why it's natural medicine that they used to guard is got lost. That's why it's the climate change is not outside of their everyday practice. Within their everyday practice, they don't know what kind of food they are eating. When their traditional the animal getting sick, they are also getting sick and contaminating their water system through dam or other mining industries and mining energy industries. So all the traditional land-based roles or practice is broke because of traditional, because of profitable ways of thinking, profitable ways of thinking the meanings of development. So from the community, how they want to solve it. According to the Kainai First Nation community that I had opportunity to learn, they said the solution is already there. We don't need to find it out. Solution, for example, in the First Nation communities is TD rights. We need to learn TD rights to following or creating climate change solution and awareness of indigenous ways of life into the policy and practices. And we can have the alternative energy source, for example, wind and solar power, and collaboration between all forms of government, local, provincial, and federal. And indigenous community, they never deny Western knowledge. They want to use Western knowledge to solving their problem. The challenges became indigenous knowledge or indigenous people or local people, they are being used in Western ways of knowing, Western ways of solving the problem. The government structure created for the colonization, the climate change solution, the government or industry or multinational industry, they want to use the same government structure to solving the problem. So that's why the climate change solution is became another burden to the many indigenous communities. So making climate change is not only one person's responsibility, or it's not only indigenous people responsibility or land-based people responsibility. It's all of our responsibility from all levels. So government need to hear those stories. Which stories? Traditional land-based stories, which has been sustainable for 1,000 years, and connect our work, our ways of thinking development or creating energy into the relationality, land, and give opportunity to youth, build their confidence or self-determination. More trees, more native grasses. As you know, how important native grasses, because they has been for thousands or million years maybe. So elder and children community they need to be involved all through our research, through our education, through the development. Another example I would like to share from how the climate change challenges that I have learned, how it is created by human. The human created. Whenever we talk about natural disaster, but it's never natural. It was created by the human. So as I said, from the Kainai First Nation community is created through the residential school, stealing the children from the community and giving to the school, which is not controlled by the indigenous people. And over there, there's lots of oppression, lots of discrimination. And through the colonial education, through Indian Act, and through the colonial faith. So when you are practicing colonial religion, is also the creating different forms of climate change to the indigenous communities. If we want to give concrete example, the community elder and knowledge keeper, they said is invasive species is killing buffaloes through the colonization, and this impacted lots of artificial or dependent on the colonial food system, and monopoly farming, which used high toxic, high level of fertilizer, and those fertilizer is mixing with the local water source, introducing colonial food system, colonial harvesting, and also taking traditional hunting rights from the community, which was the significant source of their traditional food system. So how to solve those problems? Why this human created? Because of the changing traditional right, colonial land ownership, and also colonial ways of governing or managing the land. For example, creating the dam, controlling natural water flows, and controlling the canal, which is created lots of the climate change, water crisis. As you know, Canada is one of the largest sweet water rich based country, but many indigenous communities, they don't have sweet drinking water. Many indigenous communities, they are facing the drinking water advisory. And settler farming and not know at all, or maybe not enough community consultation when the indigenous land has been transferring from the federal to the provincial government. So there are no enough consultation at all. So another example I would like to give from my own research that I have done in Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh. So as you can see, the bottom part is natural forest. It's 97% diversity. And when we are looking into the natural forest, it's not only for human. There are many non-human, and it's food source and it's for everyone. And as you can see, top part is lumber plantation. Lumber plantation is for the only outsider. So when I was working, I had opportunity to work in 2002. If you dig only 5 feet, you can get that drinking water. Now, when we visited in 2013 and 14, you have to dig 450 feet, and people don't have money for that. And as you can see, how this is only one sample of the hill. There are hundreds of hill occupied by the outsider, or by creating of lumber plantation because it's profitable. So climate change became profitable in a sense. Your natural forest is not green enough, or is not profitable. So they are creating new forest, but how new forest or taking land ownership from the indigenous people or ethnic minority people is creating the climate crisis, that is drinking water crisis, and is human created. So I asked the elder and knowledge keeper in the community how to, what does it mean when we are talking about climate change or environmental sustainability, to thinking about how to build it. They said environmental governance or climate change is our traditional cultivation system. Another elder says meaning of environmental governance or climate change is traditional land water rights and our customary land practices. Because the climate change, if we look at the even 10,000, if you just exclude 500 or 600 years of colonization, the amount of damage we made in the land or the community within 500 years is more than million of years. So problem is, if you just look into the colonial period and think about, compare with thousands of years, and we can see how the traditional ways of doing or customary land practices or indigenous ways of doing, living in the environment very sustainable ways for millions of years. So what is the problem? Where is the problem? What is the meaning of science that we are thinking? If we don't understand the meaning of science from the traditional land-based perspective, we don't understand the meaning of science. So its problem is within us. The problem within us to thinking about how development, our ways of development became greedy or tool for the colonization. So key First Nation perspective, I would like to give another example. When I was thinking about impact, what we see, the meaning of impact. Most time we see, oh, impact on the water, impact on the land, impact on the specific. So our focus as a science or educator is very narrow. So indigenous elder from the Cree First Nation communities. So when you are thinking about climate change impact, you have to decolonize your mind. What does it mean? So impact means it's on everything. It's on the water, animal, health, plant, soil, insect, everything. So meanings of land is not only the colonial sense of land, it's everything. So that's why we need to decolonize our ways of thinking in climate change impact, our ways of solving the problem as well. So when we are thinking the impact, we mostly see the current stage of impact. But according to the Cree First Nation elder and knowledge keeper, they say it is impact on 7 generations. What does it mean? It's impacted the 3 generation or many generation ways of sustainability, and is going to impact next 3 generation. Because of what? Because of current generation greedy profit maximization. So that's why the community, they said impact, we have to see it's a long period or long lasting impact on various generations. So they also said we need to decolonize the way we think, the way we do. For example, indigenous community, they know how to solve the problem. For example, they said the indigenous elder, knowledge keeper, they want to guide us. They want to help us how the community's problem need to solve. So what we need to do, we need to learn from the community, work from the community in a way they can use us instead of we are saying how to do better. Because we don't know. The community, they know what is their problem and how to solve their problem. And they want to use, when I'm saying we, it means Western researcher, educator who got training from the Western ways of knowing. They want to use us to solve the problem. And community elder and knowledge keeper, they want to guide in a way they can solve the problem. That's why they want to collaborate with us. And collaborative engagement, they want to be engaged from the very beginning of our research, very beginning of our education. It's not when we are proposing research, we got the grant or we are doing research and we want to invite someone to be as a tokenization. Because we already set our mind what we want to do and we want to invite someone to be part of it. And they see this is the tokenization. They want to involve at the very beginning when we are thinking even. And they want us to talk with them. They want us work with them. And they want us work with them in a way is help them to youth capacity building, community-based research. We need to spend enough time with the community so that community know who we are and what we are doing. At the same time, we will have the opportunity to learn from the community, what community wants, and overcome challenges. Whenever we face problem, we need to discuss with the elder and leaders. It's not only scientists. Of course, scientists is important, but first, most important is we need to talk with the elders or the community people, those who can help us to solve this problem. And how to do it? Right information at the right time. It's not once we are done and talking afterwards. They want right information at the right time. Regular meeting with the community, ongoing conversation. For this, also they need funding. We need to meet with like this. They wanted to share their perspective, and we will have many opportunity from them. And when we are thinking about climate change, we shouldn't think very narrowly. We have to think about everything is connected. For example, protecting land, water, environment, and has to be guided through 3D responsibilities. So how to do it? If we think about climate change research or education from community perspective, we need to think to creating community-led infrastructure, how community wants, so that community they can use everyday in their everyday practice. They can think about how to proper utilize their water, how to in relation to their land-based practices, promoting land traditional knowledge, creating community-led climate change research indicator and assessment according to community wants. And also we need to see how the current structure is not working. It didn't work. We have seen the colonial time that it didn't work. Do we need more evidence for it that it's not working? And we need to reform climate change management policy and practices from all through the structure. So when I'm thinking as a researcher, how can we develop our responsibility? What is that? We have to create meaningful bridge between community knowledge and scholar worldview so that it can be meaningful for the community and it can be meaningful for me as a researcher. We need to understand that knowledge varies land to land, community to community, elder to elder, and all those knowledge is diversity of beauty. It's not barrier. But many times the community see the researcher, they want to use compare from one community to other community. And it became the colonial ways of thinking. We shouldn't compare because knowledge varies land to land, community to community. So we have to see the problem and barriers from diverse perspective. That's why they call epistemological pluralism. That means multiple ways of knowing. And the community within one community is knowledge varies from community elder to elder, right? And we can learn many ways from the elders. This is the beauty of the solving the problem. When we are going fixed ways of knowing, that become the Western ways, and it become the problem for the community. Because most time we see our perspective in top, or the one perspective is solving the problem for all community. That's why community see we need to learn the multiple ways. We need to think multiple ways, and human and non-human both. And we need to spend enough time to the community so that community, they know what we are doing. They can help from each step. And that's why they call community-based participatory action research, engage with their community and learning from the community. And I also can learn from the community what community wants. Engaging community people from the very beginning, from all stages, all through process. And community, they want to be involved from the very beginning. They can help us. That's what I have learned from my last 15 to 12 years in Canada. And also I learned from my country in Bangladesh. Considering my research to thinking how my research or education we are doing to helping to solve the problem community needs, and also building the community capacity, and also advocating community knowledge. Understanding community needs all through my research, all through my work I'm doing. Last but not least, we as a researcher, we need to think how my research can transform me, who I am. If my research is not helping to learn, I'm not doing enough. So for all of you as a researcher, I would like to request, think how we as a together can build community, how we as a together can build solidarity to transform us who we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjan, for a very interesting lecture and for bringing in the voices of the indigenous groups you worked together with, you co-researched with. Thank you very much. Now I introduce the panel, and Jebunnessa Chapola, sitting there, is a SSHRC postdoctoral fellow in Canada. She's a settler of color woman who is trained as an anti-racist, decolonial feminist educator and practitioner. She is a Saskatoon and Calgary, Canada-based activist scholar. Both her PhD and postdoctoral fellowship research works are directly related to anti-racism. In addition to her academic career, she's also engaged in decolonial social justice, community activism, and community building activities. Shayan Shokrgozar is a PhD fellow at the Center for Climate and Energy Transformation CET at the University of Bergen. Shayan's research primarily draws from the disciplines and subdisciplines of political ecology, critical agrarian studies, and critical energy geography to analyze the implications of incumbent ideas and institutions on habitat and the lived experience of the citizenry, especially agropastoralists. Ragnhild Freng Dale is a social anthropology and senior researcher at the Western Norway Research Institute. Her research interests include climate transitions, energy imaginaries, and how energy infrastructure impacts local and indigenous communities in the Arctic, primarily in Sápmi, and Northern Norway. Several of her projects have been in collaboration with the performing arts field. I will first invite the panelists. I would like to follow this order here to share your reactions, your thoughts on the lecture, and also ask questions if you wish before we open for a conversation with the audience. Please, Jebunnessa.
Do you want me to go first?
I would like to, yeah.
Would you mind to start from that corner? Because there is a reason, because I'm also a settler of color scholar, right? So since the speech just ended with that perspective, so let's start with Norwegian perspective, maybe.
Okay, yeah, great. Good idea.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, thank you very much for a very, very interesting and thought-provoking lecture. I think what sticks out to me as a majority society Norwegian, I was born and raised in Bergen. I didn't have I only learned more about the north of Norway and Sápmi and how Sami communities, which is what I did my PhD research in northern Norway, in Hammerfest and western Finnmark, which has experienced a lot of petroleum development in the past decade or so. And learning more about that context as an adult in a setting where it's getting better, but we didn't learn much in school when I was a kid, and there's still a lot that majority society needs to learn. Also required a lot of unlearning on my side, let's say, and relearning. So that part of your lecture really speaks to me as well. And learning to listen, really, which I think is coming from the performing arts. Also, that's a thing that you work a lot on, is learning to listen to different perspectives and different voices. But also, I think that's crucial in our work as researching issues that really impact local communities much more than they impact us. Although it's obviously linked, because what the Norwegian state and government does is related to everyone who lives in Norway, really. And so it's, in some ways you can say we are also the official Norwegianization policy of the Indigenous Sami in Norway ended more than 40 years ago, but it's still, the impacts are ongoing, and there is also an argument to be made that the current kind of now green energy development in the north has, the former Sami president Aili Keskitalo and Sami Council and others have started using the term green colonialism for a development of, say, wind farms and such on Sami land that take away their opportunity to continue practicing their sustainable traditional livelihoods, such as reindeer herding. And so there's a lot of these issues that you speak of that are also highly relevant here in Norway. And I think, as a researcher, obviously our positionality is important to continuously reflect on when we plan and carry out our research projects.
Yeah, I guess to begin with, thank you very much for incredibly rich talk. There are many different elements that I think would be worth exploring and discussing further. But there's one thing you mentioned that I think is difficult to emphasize how important it is. And mentioned development as a tool for colonization, essentially, of sorts. And in being a Southern researcher working in the context of the Global South, this is something that I see is very much embedded in how a lot of how things are carried out and implemented manifest themselves, right? And I mean, developmentalism is, an element of it, but also elements around like modernity, around progress, about growth, that are very much a, product of ideas that are not rooted in, cultures and traditions and histories necessarily universally, right? But it has become this dominant hegemonic idea. And you see it very much embedded in climate change mitigation. You see it embedded in the SDGs. And I mean, just to give you two examples with SDG 4, quality education, what does that really mean, right? And why, the hegemonic idea of education that is now essentially being institutionally, imposed top down on the entire world, or on SDG 13, climate action, which really makes no mention of indigenous knowledge, and so forth and so on. I mean, we can kind of go on kind of looking at these. And the way this is also important is looking at what is referred to as post-colonial countries. I've been doing research in India, which is referred to as a post-colonial context. You kind of see these histories and traditions of colonizations of the British Raj that are very much still embedded in the institutions and environmental governance and Forest Rights Act, et cetera, so forth, and very much in the issue of land. And land is incredibly material, right? If you're an agripastoral community and have been living with essentially as a subsistence or semi-subsistent farmer, and your land is now appropriated for a solar park because of climate change mitigation, this essentially is in some ways a ethnocidal process, right? Because it is essentially bringing to an end a cultural pattern, a life way that has existed for thousands of years with a fundamentally different relationship to the land. And just very briefly to kind of end my thoughts, these lands in Western Rajasthan, they're referred to as orans, or sacred groves. And they are lands that have been dedicated to, for example, deities or warriors that are meant to protect the people, right? And how in the kind of the way we conceive and understand science, there isn't, because of the rigidity around it, we don't necessarily care much about spirituality, and how that has been an important element in protecting ecology and social cohesion. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much. Jebunnessa.
Thank you, Shayan and Ragnhild and speaker Ranjan Datta. Yeah, the discussion is, I think it's very important for today's world. And today I'm sitting here. I think I'm here to represent my learning ways. Since we were talking a lot about decolonial learning, we are talking about relearning, unlearning, learning, and we are saying that it's a lifelong journey. So how does it look like, and how does it feel, and how to perceive this concept of decolonization, right? So when I started to learn about this decolonial education, I repeatedly asked this question, and I didn't find the answer. I would like to share a little story of my life, which will help you to understand actually what we are trying to say together as a panel. I born in a colonial land, and then immigration brought me here in Canada. So I came from one colonial land to another colonial land, that is Canada. So until and unless I started to have this learning, unlearning, and relearning journey, I didn't understand actually what I'm representing and what is my aim to learn about decolonization. And as Ranjan mentioned many times, that as a researcher, we need to take some responsibility. And how, right? It's a huge, big thing that we need to take the responsibility to decolonize ourselves first, before we talking about decolonization, before we talking about how to decolonize our thoughts and knowledge and our ways of doing and our ways of thinking, I realized in my doctoral journey that I want to do it by myself first. So I have taken the responsibility to decolonize myself first. And then as a community activist, I realized that it is important to build a relationship with the community first, as a researcher and also as a citizen. Throughout my entire research journey, I would say that from the day I started my education life, I would say colonial education, which usually we do not say it, right? So now I have learned to say it, because I have graduated from University of Bergen from 2005 to 2009. I was here, but now I think I have developed those lenses to question about my education system. When I was here in Bergen, I never met any Indigenous student on my campus. And I do not know, still I do not know whether we have any Indigenous Research Institute at the University of Bergen, right? So I think this journey is very important. And since I'm a researcher in the climate change field, I have been hearing firsthand all the stories, painful stories, happy stories from the community members. They are Indigenous, they are our Indigenous relations, Indigenous people, racialized people, right? We are hearing all those stories. And in today's world, what I feel that it's not that we need a lot of research. We have done enough of it. We have a lot of research. What is the problem? We know. Sometimes we know what is the solution, but there is no action. So until and unless we learn how to decolonize our system, until and unless we pose this question to our system, there will not be any change. So that's my positionality, and I'm very honored that in front of some scholarly people, I have got this opportunity to say it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jebunnessa. I think this call for action was present in both your talks, right? And it's really important. And before we engage with the audience here, I was wondering if you could develop a little bit more on this topic of research. You're talking about research, and that the Indigenous communities also want funding, that they want to get involved early. We've heard from so many colleagues from other countries that many times a certain call requires that you need to have a partner in somewhere, and then just very close to the deadline or with a very set project, they send to have your consent just to make this, to tick this box. And of course, this is not how we should be engaging with researchers, and particularly for you that you're saying you do co-research with these Indigenous groups you visit, and you want funding. This was very new for me, maybe not for you, but for me, the idea of also that they do research and then they want funding for the research they do. So if you could develop a little bit more on this, and especially focusing on the experience you have for climate change research, because often these communities are the most affected, and also that maybe influence less in policies and so on. So how can they influence research and policy by also doing?
Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's so important and also interesting to learn from all of your perspective. Funding is important because if you think about the industry, about energy industry that you are working, and I also working how pipeline industries is making billions of dollars, and also uranium mine billions of dollars, damaging the land. And it's not the money they need, they change everything. But when you think about community, how much money they are getting, because when you're doing research, we're understanding, making policy recommendation, but what we are giving to the community, what they are going to do with this research, what does it mean? When we just gathering as a community, do we have money? Even though we have money, what we are giving to the community, just take it and practice it. Research became another colonial tool because we invite them, learn with them, then done. That's why the indigenous elder recently, even last month when I met, there are many researches going on. You invite us, we come here. The problem is the conversation is just doesn't continue. Just end many research here. That's why we need money or funding for the community action or what community wants. So research also should be part of the solving problem or bringing the assessment tools when we are thinking about climate change. With the community, I was talking about how water created, artificially created water crisis. I understand it. Now what community is, how community is going to benefit from me, or what I can do. For my research, I have to advocate. They need money to creating their traditional ways of foresting, or saying it, the colonial ways of solving problem, climate change, it became another problem. Community need to have their land rights. Without land back, climate change solution doesn't come. Climate change solution means land back. Land back is not in colonial sense. I want to hold the land, I want to sell it. Is our obligation to the land, our responsibility to the land. So that's why community need money to break this. That's why what I have learned, climate change solution means land back.
Yes, thank you. I don't know, unless you have questions to each other or comments or reactions. Yeah.
I think I don't know whether it is a comment or what, I don't know, but I'm feeling to say something. That's what I can say. I would like to add something what Ranjan said. What I have learned from Canadian Indigenous scholars, activists, educators, and my brothers and sisters, the way they treat the land, it's something new to me. As a settler of color and as a colonial product, I would say, it's something new to me. They always say that land is not for owning, land is for sharing. So that the moment I heard this, I didn't realize what I heard. So over the years, what I have learned today, what is the meaning of this? It means that how we can subvert the entire capitalistic views, right? We people, we have learned how to sell the land, and how to rape the land even. The way we have been, I would say, destroying the land. I mean, I don't know, I know we all are benefiting out of capitalism, but again, the responsibility part is missing. I've heard from our Indigenous elders and Indigenous relations, they say that take what you need. We became so greedy. We cannot deny it until and unless we start to admit this situation is not going to be changed. This climate change problem is not going to be changed. And the Indigenous people, the knowledge they are sharing, the knowledge they are trying to convey to today's greedy world, that message is for everyone's safety, for everyone's well-being. It's not only for Indigenous people. So it is high time to wake up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jebunnessa. Yes, Lisa.
Two brief thoughts. One is on, and this is slightly a reflection on what you mentioned earlier as well, on funding and such. And it's the element of how imperative it is that the research that we carry out is rooted in what communities feel like they need, and what can be helpful for them. I witnessed this during my fieldwork recently, on how when I went in, I had particular ideas or questions or aims and objectives that I was trying to attain, and how, as I was talking to people, I realized that it is those elements, but perhaps the cognate aspects of that is what they really would benefit from knowing more about or understanding where perspectives are.
Could you share maybe where did you do your
fair enough.
fieldwork?
So I was doing field work on essentially energy transitions in India, in the state of Rajasthan, where currently the world's largest solar park is. And these are areas that are very far away from where energy is actually consumed, right? But So there's I think that element that is imperative to recognize, and then on the element of land, I came across this quote. It was an interview with Sami activist Nila Sami, who essentially said that the land doesn't belong to us; we belong to the land, and that's something that I've kind of been sitting and thinking and reflecting on for a couple of years now. Because it's a simple sentence to say, but there's so much depth to it.
Yeah, it's support the capitalism.
Yeah.
Ragnhild also has something to
Yeah,
comment.
I mean, yeah, I agree with what you've all said, and I think but it's also a problem when it comes to like this kind of idea of development as being building infrastructure, particularly like energy infrastructure. And now that we're kind of transitioning from petroleum to and coal to other energy sources such as solar and wind, they require space in a different way than, I mean, not all oil is offshore, obviously, a lot of coal and tar sands and all of that is also like very like land intensive. But then there's this idea that the green is good in a way that makes it difficult to criticize, because obviously everyone wants to be part of that solution of building the renewable energy. But then when that essentially just displaces people, whether it's in Sapmi or in India or wherever it is, that's also just perpetuating the exact same patterns, but under a different suffix by green, kind of. So it's I think it's also difficult to kind of get that through in the mainstream perception and understanding of what energy is and should be, obviously. But I mean, so in October 2021, so a year and a half ago almost now, there was a Supreme Court verdict in Norway where the South Sami Fosen case, the Fosen case in Trøndelag in the South Sami area, where the state was essentially, I mean, the Supreme Court essentially said that the wind farms should not have been built and that they are infringing the rights of the South Sami to practice their culture. And we're still waiting for a solution to this. The government has not really managed to solve the issue, because they want to kind of redo the assessment and the criteria so that the wind farm can stay, but it won't be a breach of human rights. But how are they going to do that when the South Sami reindeer herding districts obviously say that there is not, the turbines need to come down? So you get this like deadlock where the government claims to do everything they can, but essentially they're just, extending the problem by not taking responsibility and just letting time slide, really. And so, and there's arguments that, yeah, but now the turbines are built, so maybe they should stay. But then the right thing to do from the Indigenous perspective would obviously be to follow the rule of law and take them down. So it's, I mean, it's just an example. I'm sure you have similar examples, but it's, yeah, and it's also not just an example, because it is the lives of and practice of cultures that is at stake. And that's like also, majority society's responsibility to safeguard in that transition so that we don't do the same mistakes as was done in the past.
Yeah. I may very briefly.
Yes. And then if you have questions, please just let me know, because then we organize, but yes.
Yeah, I was actually researching the case of Fosen Wind a couple of years ago. This is before the Supreme Court case was out, and I was having a conversation with one of the South Sami reindeer herders who used.
Just since we also been streamed, so if you could just say a few words about the case also for people, because I think it's very like known here, but not everyone knows.
Yeah, so the Fosen Wind project is one of the largest, essentially, on-land projects in Europe, and it's oriented toward. There are several wind parks. There were 5 or so to begin with in the portfolio, and they are about maybe 100 or so kilometers west of Trondheim in central Norway. two of the parks, at least, Sturhaya and Ruan, encroach upon approximately 30% of the pasture land of South Sami herders who use that area for their winter pasture. So yeah, very briefly on the project, happy to talk about it more if it's interesting, but like contextualizing it and what we were talking about a bit earlier is also how the impact assessments that are done for these projects, and you see this also in other, like in the case of the North Sami and mines, and also Sweden, is on how the science and the knowledge used for doing impact assessment is rooted in particular ontologies and epistemologies, right, that do not take into account Indigenous perspectives. So there have been alternative impact assessments done using Indigenous essentially knowledge with collaboration with them, right? And they have very different findings in terms of its effect on the pasture, on reindeer herding, on the lived experiences of citizenry. And I think, yeah.
Very,
If I can just
interesting
add very
points.
quickly, there's also this notion that, this land is unused in a way because there is no large infrastructure there. And obviously it's not unused, it's just used in a way that doesn't leave those kinds of traces and damages to the landscape. So it's also that perspective that needs to...
Right. So
yeah.
in Canadian perspective, we use a word, terranolis. That means empty the land. And empty land, what does it mean? Grab the land. But we keep forgetting that land is not empty. Non-living species, they live there, right? We need to keep that land for themselves too. It's not that, in my eyes, it looks empty, but it's not empty. And also, what I have learned throughout my research life, that colonialism is the cause of climate change. Capitalism is the cause of climate change. But today's world, still we are on denial. And from our Indigenous scholars and educators, what I have learned, land is my body. How do we treat our body? We need to treat the land the same way, the way we take care of our body. We need to be soft, gentle. We need to relearn how to treat our land, how to treat our water. Water is life. We should not forget that, but we keep forgetting.
Yes, now I'd like to include the audience. Ellie has a question.
Hello, thank you so much to all the panelists. This was very interesting and my head is spinning as I listen to you. My name is Elin Skar. I work here at the CMI and I'm involved in a project on the Norwegian Truth and Reconciliation Commission, looking into historical repression against the Sami, Kven and two other national minorities. And I have been trying to get my head around this concept of colonization, which I find very, very, very difficult. And the same with decolonization. I read and I see that there are so many different perspectives and understandings of this. So I would just like to invite each of the panelists to give me or us your definition or view, just the essence of what decolonization means to each of you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Larissa, because I think I'd like to collect a few questions and then we can have another round.
Hello, I'm going to stand up so everyone can see me. My name is Larissa. I'm from Brazil. I'm a PhD candidate and I'm a guest researcher here at LawTransform. And I was fascinated by the presentation. I do study decolonization in Brazil, not related to climate changes, but mostly related to gender and racial issues. And one thing I actually wanted to ask is that how you feel the position and the part that academia takes in this. Because I deeply agree with the fact that many times we do already have a lot of research on subjects and we do know the answers and we do know what should be done. And the fact that it's not done is a political and economical choice. But I also do feel that in academia, there's still a lot of, maybe not here in Norway from what I've seen, but in Brazil it happens a lot, that there's a lot of misunderstanding about decolonization. And as the professor presented, he understands the natives' knowledge as scientifically proven. And this can be very polemic, let's say. And many times what we present as knowledge, and especially considering minorities people's views, is not considered knowledge in academia. So I wonder how you see the academia's part in actually, enforcing decolonization and actually making changes happen. Thank you.
Should I ask the question now, or should I wait? No? Okay, my name is Natalie, and I'm a master's student at the University of Bergen. And I'm actually writing a master's thesis about the Fosen case. And I'm from Trøndelag myself, so thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very interesting. So I'm just wondering, what impact do you think the Supreme Court decision will have for further cases, both in Norway, but also internationally? One thing that I found very interesting about the Fosen case is that it is happening in a South Sami area, this making it pretty unique, as the South Sami being a minority within the minority. Thus they have a different status than it can be discussed, but if it was happening in, for example, North Sami area. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. We have a round here for answers, and then we might have time also to another round. So if you have other questions, just. But I was just thinking Larissa's question was something that I was also considering. How is it also? I understand that maybe different environments, different fields in research might be more open or closed to, for example, doing co-research, and this idea is this research, how, if you encounter this kind of attitude within academia, and how is it to go around it? Yeah, but maybe could we go this way here, and then if we have another round, the other way around?
Sure. Do you want me to answer all three, or
whatever you want to answer? You feel it's
yeah. I mean, the notion of decolonization hasn't really been a big part of Norwegian academia, I would say. Also not, I mean, I did my PhD in Cambridge, which obviously has its own history of coloniality and all of this, where it was a big discussion in geography. It was a discussion in part of anthropology, and it became much more of a discussion in anthropology in the final year of my PhD, and after I've left, it's also been a continuous discussion. So that is ongoing there, and I think it's also coming to Norwegian academia, really. I mean, it's just, I think it's a lot to do with unlearning and reassessing perspectives and gaining an understanding of how the things that we have taken for granted as neutral and objective and good might not be all that objective and neutral, and might need a reassessment of actually where that idea that it's objective and neutral came from, and how we can rework some of the framework that includes that has a more pluralistic and diverse way of making academic knowledge, as well as in kind of acknowledging that there are different ontologies that have impacts on how we act in the world. So that's a short. The position of academia, I think also an issue is funding sources, in a way that even when we are required to, a lot of the Research Council in Norway applications now require you to have user partners and all of this, but they often want user partners that can put in a certain amount of money or time or these kinds of things as pro bono. And I think there also needs to be funding that is like, actually, we're going to pay particularly Indigenous communities and communities and minority communities to participate in the research. And then we need more of that, and not just that we lean on like industry and richer partners or municipalities that have people on the payroll that do various things, but actually that there is funding for community as well. I think is something that we as researchers can push for, but it's also something that the funding sources need to make more room for, both at the EU level. I know that they're working with the Sami Council and others to try to look at that, but that is a work that needs to happen. And the Supreme Court decision, I hope it will have an impact that will lead to a better process in other areas. At the moment, there's 2 potential wind farm projects in East Finnmark, in North Sami area, that are controversial because the municipalities have started the process of kind of asking asking the processes to continue and the assessments to continue before they involved the reindeer communities. And so there's disagreement on whether they are following the correct process, because they are also now part of the, they are required to consult at the local and regional level as well. But hopefully that will lead to better process. But there's so many cases that are happening in North Sami areas where it's the Fosen case is mentioned a lot as like relevant set of that this might be a new Fosen case, or this might be the Fosen case requires us to move at a slower pace so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, and these kinds of things are now much more part of the debate. It's also with the power line that's like set to that is necessary to electrify the LNG facilities of Equinor and Hammerfest, and there's like all these cases that we don't yet know what the impact of the Supreme Court decision will be, because these processes are still at the very early stages. But I mean, my hope would be that they will have a positive impact on the fairness of those processes and the outcomes as well. But we don't yet know that. And internationally, obviously, international verdicts build on each other. The Supreme Court verdict also builds on international decisions, and so I think it will be important internationally as well.
Thank you. I think it's very important question that all of we need to ask ourselves, what does the decolonization mean? And when I'm thinking, I born in a family that we used to grow everything, all the food. We needed to go to the market only for cooking oil because we didn't have cooking oil. I remember my mom used to cook a curry with 101 items of vegetable, and she used to collect all those 101 items within our surrounding areas. But I didn't learn the importance of growing food as part of my education. And when I learned how to be objectives or neutral by the name of science. But what I have learned, science always being purposeful to solving the problem. But we define science in a way it's not connected with the practice. When I understood it, then I understand how my education was colonial. And when I done my master's or bachelor in sociology, anthropology, when I was working with my own community, with my minority communities, when I was giving the result, they said, I share a lot of stories, and you call it data, it's fine. But what I'm going to do with this? Where are my stories? So my research didn't help even me, who I am, who I need to be. How my research is going to be helpful to the community that I'm working. It's not that colonial. It's not the high time we need to rethink who I am. And decolonization, as I said, is a lifelong process. It's not that since we are living in the colonial world, colonial structure, we cannot solve everything at a time. But every moment is a gift, an opportunity. That's why I need to be excited. The opportunity that I got today, the opportunity you got today to change ourselves. And once we can change ourselves, we can build a community. And change should be start from here and be purposeful that whatever we are doing, and the small changes can make a bigger community, and it will one day we can go to our destination. So that's the way I see the meaning of decolonization in even Brazil, even in Bangladesh, even in India, in all over the places. We need to think about how our research, we can make small change from ourselves, learning from the community, and thinking how community knowledge is scientific knowledge, how my master's thesis, PhD thesis, postdoc, or the research grant we are thinking. it will create huge possibilities. So I see light in our future because we are changing. And today you care about it. That's why all of you came here. And I see the light on you. That's why we are really came. And we are going to make change. And decolonization is a celebration for me.
Yeah, I have brief reflections on all three questions that were mentioned, but I think I will start with the decolonization element. And yeah, I think I agree with much of what was said, and I guess several things I would add is that there is a model of social life that essentially is a logic or an idea by which much of what is taking place today within various domains is operated through, right? That's modernity, developmentalism, growth, progress. But this is carried out through extractivism, through the appropriation of Southern labor, through the appropriation of Southern resources, right? Unfair trade agreements. This is the ongoing process of colonization, just kind of discursively discussed and contextualized discursively. And I would say that an important part of working towards decolonization or decoloniality is decentering this model of social life, of decentering the material and discursive power of capitalism, of extractivism, of patriarchy, et cetera, so forth, and replacing it not with a particular individual idea, but a heterodoxy, right, of a pluriverse. Ones that, for example, in South America, you have the Bundeswehr, in South Africa of Ubuntu, in India, Eco-Swaraj. And I think we can draw a lot of inspiration from ecofeminism that draws inspiration from many different traditions. And I loved how you contextualize it as a celebration and essentially an ongoing process. So I'll leave that on that. I think Ragnhild's response on the case of what the implications of Fusen Win's Supreme Court case is was quite. One thing I would add, and this is something I was recently doing a research day in Helsinki and chatting with researchers there on various elements of extractivism, etc. And they were telling me that since the Supreme case in Norway, one thing that they started noticing is how investors and developers are now looking essentially at other countries in the area, right, like Finland and Sweden, essentially, and for investments and projects, which is also a fascinating element to look into. But also Finland, just the two northernmost municipalities, believe it, maybe counties, have now banned projects. So this has various elements and effects that would be interesting to look at. And finally, on the role of academics, which in this element, I'd say a couple of brief things. I think one is that I think academics have this unique, essentially, or maybe not even necessarily unique, but have the capacity to work toward delegitimating that science has a essentially supremacy over other ways of knowing. Right, what is essentially delegitimating the epistemological superiority of science, and this has been referred to as a form of epistemological violence or injustice, right? That academia and research is carried out throughout the 19th and 20th century, and having been trained in kind of Western education, I see it as also being a part of my responsibility in making space and writing back and kind of discussing and analyzing this epistemological injustice that, at this point, as a researcher, be living in the global north, I'm in some ways, a part of. Yeah.
Thank you, Shayan.
Thank you, all the panelists. It was heart melting, I would say, the way I'm hearing and the way everyone is saying it. And actually, I love the question that you asked, what's the meaning of decolonization? As an academic, we often hear this question in community level, in academic level, everywhere. So in my classroom, I need to teach about anti-racism and decolonization. So my students often ask me this question. So as a teacher, what we do? Read this article, read that article. You need to write a paper. So, but what I see from their eyes, actually they don't understand. Maybe they're reading the article, or maybe they do not know how to read that article. And the way I try to teach them, I'm telling you the same way. I'm trying my best. I tell them that, see, the way I have learned the meaning of decolonization is like this. I born and brought up in Bangladesh. I finished my elementary, high school, and my university undergrad in Bangladesh. But I never knew who are my indigenous people, how they look like or how they think. And what I heard, that they're barbaric people. I mean, so many stereotypes that I learned through my education system. And then I left my home country for higher education, for quality education, for Western education. I came in Sweden, Norway. I got so many big degrees. But I didn't heard about indigenous people. I didn't know about indigenous worldview. I was not taught to value multiple ways of knowing. I was being trained in monolithic knowledge system, right? So I'm the best. My education is the best. Everything is best. In that context, I grew up. And then after leaving from Norway, I was in US and then Canada. Even in US, I didn't get this education. I would say that I'm very honored, humbled, and proud today that from University of Saskatchewan, for the first time, now I'm in my 40s. So for the first time in my 40s, I started to learn about these post-colonial theories. I started to learn about this decolonial education. From whom? From indigenous scholars. That throughout my entire colonial education system, my system prevented me not to learn about them. My education system didn't introduce this decolonial education, didn't teach me to respect indigenous worldview. So the way I'm feeling today, this is my decolonial journey. It took my entire life to know who I am, and took my entire, I feel to cry today. I feel to cry today because I didn't learn who I am. My education system didn't encourage me to think in this direction. And my education system didn't teach me to treat myself as a best. Which education is best? Why we are calling it best? We never learned to question. We were not being encouraged to be a critical thinker, to be a decolonial educator, right? So I think that's my answer to the meaning of decolonization. And to me, decolonization means lifelong journey. That's what I have learned. And also, I'm just in the middle of the process of my decolonial journey. I haven't started yet, or maybe I want to start. That's my positionality, and that's my understanding about decolonization. So, and until and unless we do not understand who I am, I will not understand what is my responsibility. I will not understand how we can take the responsibility for our loving planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jebunnessa. I think I would like to thank all the panelists. We have, only 1 minute left. So I understand that you might have other questions, but we have lunch outside that you're welcome to have and enjoy together with our panelists, and you can continue the conversation. But I would like to thank you again, all of you, and of course, our lecturer, and Jebunnessa for this, for sharing your experience in such a powerful way, putting on the table here your views on what colonization is from bringing from your heart, and your own experience was really powerful. So I think it's a very nice way of closing this session. Thank you so much.